north towards Sword. Meanwhile, the British armour and infantry were pressing slowly inland. Early in the afternoon, they overran 21st Panzer's anti-tank screen, and by 4 o'clock had reached Biville, only a few miles from Caen. West of them, the Canadians were pressing south from Juno, but between Juno and Sword, a 4-mile gap still remained to be closed. It was into this corridor that the German tanks drove. In the evening, forward elements of 21st Panzer reached the coast near Luc-sur-Mer, but without support, they were soon forced to withdraw. This failure of the Germans to mount a major counteroffensive on the first day, either against Sword or Omaha, was to cost them dearly in the following weeks. As D-Day drew to a close, Allied commanders had cause for quiet confidence. 4 defensible beachheads had been established on the French coast, and a 5th, though still vulnerable and under visually directed artillery fire, was being rapidly reinforced and pushed out. A total of 150,000 men had been landed by air and sea, at a cost of some 10,000 casualties, only a quarter of whom were killed. The establishment of a single continuous lodgment and the capture of Caen on D-Day had proved too ambitious. In some sectors, particularly that of Omaha, German units had fought with surprising professionalism and courage. 21st Panzer had been stationed closer to the coast than Allied planners had anticipated. Its counterattack had been unexpected and had blunted the drive for Caen, and although driven off, it had quickly regrouped and now stood between the British and their primary strategic objective. In the days immediately following D-Day, Montgomery's priority was to expand and strengthen the lodgment. The landings were now running between 8 and 12 hours behind schedule, and powerful German armoured formations were known to be moving into the Normandy area. To maintain the momentum of the initial assault, the Allies had to press further inland. The ultimate success of Overlord would depend upon their ability to concentrate forces and supplies in the beachhead more rapidly than the Germans could bring up reinforcements to oppose them. It was imperative to gain depth, to create space for the assembly and organization of follow-up forces, to provide room for maneuver, and to establish the logistical infrastructure to support a major campaign. In all sectors, the Allies continued to maintain pressure, pushing out the perimeter of the lodgment while their enemies desperately strove to contain it. By midday on the 7th, the British and Canadians had secured the corridor between Juno and Sword, establishing a single continuous lodgment between Port-en-Bessin and the mouth of the Orne. From Gold, units of 50 Division captured Bayeux, but the road to Caen was to remain closed for many weeks to come. Early on the 7th, forward elements of the 12th SS moved into the line to the left of 21st Panzer and the remnants of the 716th Division. Later that day, these clashed with strong Canadian forces advancing towards Caen. In a series of engagements fought throughout the 7th and the 8th, the Canadians were savagely mauled, their forward units defeated in detail and their offensive thrown back. By the 9th, the 12th SS was firmly established in strong positions to the northwest of Caen. In the American sector, Omaha was to remain vulnerable and isolated for more than 2 days. Yet during this time, while men and equipment were pouring into the beachhead, no attempt was made by the Germans to reinforce the beleaguered 352nd or to mount a serious counterattack. The fierce resistance shown during the landings soon withered, and by the 8th, the Americans had linked up with the British advancing from Gold, secured their right flank on the Veer, and were pressing inland. West of the Veer, the Americans were meeting much more determined resistance. After their initial confusion and hesitation, the German forces in the Cotentin rallied strongly. Reserves were quickly mobilized to prevent any further expansion of the Utah beachhead. For the Americans, progress was agonizingly slow. Their airborne forces, due to be relieved once the beachhead was secure, had to be retained and deployed in offensive operations. On June the 11th, units of the 101st Airborne captured Carentan, and on the following day, linked up with troops from Omaha. By the end of the first week, the Allies were firmly established in Normandy. A further 10 divisions had joined those of the assault wave. From Omaha, the American 1st Division had pressed nearly 20 miles inland. Elsewhere, the gains were more modest. The junction of Utah and Omaha, straddling the Veer, was only a few miles deep, and Panzer Grenadiers of the 17th SS had taken up positions south of Carentan. German strength in this sector now amounted to 8 divisions, although many of these were either under strength or badly depleted. In the British sector, the capture of Caen remained a distant prospect. Here, the Germans were concentrating the main weight of their armoured reserves. Panzer Lehr moved into the line on the 9th, and 2nd Panzer a few days later. On the 13th, an attack by 7th Armoured towards Villers-Bocage was caught between these formations after its spearhead was broken by a battalion of Tiger tanks. Rommel's priority was to hold the line north of Caen. The city was the key to the open plains of northwest France. If the Allies could seize Caen and break out of the Bocage, their superior mobility and their command of the skies would enable them to fight a war of maneuver in which the Wehrmacht would be at every disadvantage. During June, 4 further SS formations were sent to Normandy, the 1st from Belgium, the 2nd from the south of France, and the 9th and 10th transferred from the Eastern Front. 3 of these would be thrown into the defense of Caen. With an almost Herculean task facing the British before Caen, the initiative passed to the Americans. Between the 13th and the 16th of June, the Americans seized bridgeheads across the Merderet and Douve rivers,